Okay, let me quickly have a look to streams. Okay, we're live on YouTube. Um, just quick check. Uh, we're live on Facebook also, and we're live on LinkedIn. All right. Yeah. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much once again for tuning into another episode of An Hour with Manager podcast. If you're one of those managers who is always inquisitive and asking questions, or one of those professionals or leaders always asking what's next, how are we going to drive the course, and how are we going to push forward in all that is happening in the global workforce, then it means you're in the right spot. You're in the right podcast today to listen to valuable information with Ubo Matthew, your host, who is going to be spearheading this or driving this very discussion with our guest Laïla von, who is power packed today to share valuable insights with us on remote work. And I'm sure, and I hope all of us are ready and willing to have that valuable information. And once again, yeah, I think the last time we spoke was last month. So I'm going to say happy February to all of us who we are meeting for the first time in February. It's still the early weeks of February. 2025 is already counting. So I hope you are making that effort to achieve your dreams and achieve your goals, and make steps to start achieving them no matter how difficult it is. Once again, welcome everybody, and welcome Laila. How are you doing today?
Hi, Bong. Hi, everyone. I'm doing good. Glad to be here and wrapping up my day with this fun interview. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. How did you get to find yourself anticipating for this conversation today for remote work? What's been on your top list to share with our listeners today? Thinking about remote work here.
Yeah, well, remote work when I started about 10, 11 years ago was not so common as it is today, right? This was way pre-COVID. Of course, there were remote workers, but I think today what's interesting is people now understand what remote work is. And then we have other, terminology out there like flexible work, hybrid working. It's now become a thing, and it's become much more mainstream. But I still think that there's so much that we can improve on when it comes to remote work. It's not just, okay, you get to work from home once or twice, 2 times a week or all the time. It's really about how can you collaborate better. So within that, there were topics that I was thinking about around how can you improve asynchronous collaboration, for example. How do you look at your culture to drive, better remote collaboration? How can you use rituals, especially as managers, as team leaders, to improve how people get to know each other better, how they connect, how they belong to a company, and also looking at the aspect of how do you bring people in person. Even though you are remote, that doesn't mean you should never meet your colleagues. So yeah, just a few things in my mind, right? So remote work is always evolving, but those are really the things that I'm interested about when it comes to working in a remote team.
All right, thank you very much for sharing that brief and in-depth. Quickly to everyone who's listening to this today, before we proceed, Managers Corner magazine has premiered a new issue called on the topic of remote work. What a very big coincidence, matching up with our conversation today on remote work. So do well to find the link in the comments, click, have a look at what we have there, have access to those informations, the data, the trends there that's talking about the future of work, talking about remote work. So we'd love to hear your feedback once you have access to a copy. And I'll be looking forward to that. And as usual, if you're listening to this show today, make sure you send in all your questions if you have any to the comment box. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, my DM is also very open, and I'm going to share them here with our guest today, who is going to respond to all of them which you have. Like our guests have talked about remote work today, talking about what is currently going on today. Work culture is becoming a way of life, whereby every professional, every business leader, every organization is also trying to see how to integrate that one way or the other either from calls, either from meetings, either from consulting, either from even working with your team, or managing your business from home, right? It's not anything where every individual is looking for a way to, to balance that whole process, to see, okay, can I try this? Can I work remotely? Can my team work remotely? Is it possible or is it difficult? As compared to before or back then, when we didn't really have access to much tools. But today, there are different tools, there are different informations out there that is also helping to foster or pioneer or champion this whole process. And our guest today is going to do much in depth into that. But before we go deeper, like you had heard her shared much of that insight, let's get to meet our guest properly and know what she's been doing so far in the space. Also moving as a manager, becoming a consultant, and also spearheading her own initiative. Laila, please would like to know more about you, and let's get to see how to connect with you more. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So it's actually ironic, the podcast is called An Hour with a Manager. I am no longer a manager. I was once upon a time a manager for a short time. But I realized actually that I wanted to manage less and be more that kind of individual contributor who could create and be almost like a solopreneur within a company. So I've worked, I started, my background is in design, done different types of design, graphic design, interior architecture, user experience design. And then from there moved into facilitation and then looking into team building and organizational culture. And then that brought me as well, into people operations. But really what I have focused on the last years has been how to drive culture from within, helping founders, helping leaders with that, and helping a lot of managers. So I do find that I am obviously working with a lot of managers, although I have preferred to kind of step out of that role and just be able to support them in their role and their day-to-day work. So today I'm a consultant for remote and hybrid work, helping distributed teams, whatever model that they may have set up. And some of the clients are, mid-sized startups or SMEs. I've had some more corporate clients. Sometimes it's about bringing new ways of working into their company and helping to inspire their leaders, in finding new ways of actually connecting and collaborating with their teams. Sometimes it's looking at how can we redesign the employee experience. And other times it's helping people, find ways to gather at an in-person offsite or retreat. So that's what I've been focusing on the most.
Thank you for that. While you were sharing your insight and what you've been focusing the most, it kind of struck me to ask, what really prompts a decision to move from saying, "Oh, I don't want to be in front of the remote team managing them, but rather let me manage those. Let me be a consultant for those who are managing remote teams"?
Yeah, I think, what happened was that I was laid off a year and a half ago at a company. Okay. But already when I was at that company, it was called Mural, I was manager, and then I actually asked I was a leader in the executive team, and I asked to get out of it because I felt a little bit out of my depth at the time. I don't think I was ready. I didn't have also I do think, managers would benefit a lot from having training and being prepared to be launched in that role. And although I consider myself a people person and have learned many skills around team dynamics through different studies I've done, and having the emotional awareness also of what that means to connect with people, I think I didn't have all the managerial skills that I could have benefited from. So that was a personal choice. But the other thing I noticed as a manager was that I was delegating a lot, and you're overseeing what needs to be done, and you're hopefully hiring people who are sometimes even, smarter than you in certain aspects of what that team needs, and that's all good. But I like to be a creator. So I mentioned in the beginning, my background is in design, and I felt like as a manager, I wasn't able to design as much. I was asking other people to design instead of me. And I missed that. That's just kind of the simple thing. It was one, I didn't feel like I was ready yet to be a manager. And two, the real reason was I want to be creating. I want to get, involved more and not just kind of problem solving and delegating tasks to others. So I think, I think I'm now as a consultant has been an interesting shift. because of course I don't have my own team to work with the way that I did before in what I do, but then I kind of become an extension of people's teams, right? So when people bring me in as a consultant, I generally, for example, I might join their team meetings. I help them plan together, and I really like being part of the team and helping to guide them along and facilitating conversations and helping the team reach their goals, whatever that is.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's a very big role you're playing, because it's one thing to have a team, and it's another thing to be able to know how to spearhead or drive that team to achieve the desired goal of the organization and initiative. And coupled with how remote work process and conversation goes these days, not all organizations is actually saying yes to the whole remote system, but we'll see how to balance that. But quickly, to at the first point, talking about reimagining rituals to drive company culture. What is the initiative behind that? Why are we looking at reimagining rituals? So why is it important to look at organizational culture and rituals to to balance up with the current state of workforce today?
So whoever's watching this now, if you take a moment to think about what are the rituals that you have at work. You may even start with a question like, what is a ritual, right? Like, what do you consider a ritual? Because ritual can be interpreted in different ways. You might have, in a country, there may be cultural rituals that people do at different times of the year, and that could be a ritual. You may have personal rituals at home, things that you might do based on your culture, your religion, your personal preferences. But companies and organizations, they also have rituals. And these are moments, these are like moments that matter, moments where you want to add more meaning, or you want to use them to connect and belong with people, or it's a ritual to help people understand a process or something like that, or to celebrate. So there are different rituals. So if you're watching this now, you may think maybe we have a ritual every time, I don't know, we deliver a project or we win a client or something. Like, do we celebrate that somehow, right? Maybe we have a ritual when a new person joins the team. What do we do to welcome them to the team? Is it giving them a gift? Is it introducing them in a certain way? Is it taking them out? So there's different rituals. And as companies are moving to a different way of working, so different model like remote, being fully remote or being hybrid, some of those rituals maybe only happened in person in the office. So now you have to reimagine, what will that ritual look like? How do we need to design it differently so that it can be adapted to this new way of working? So if you are hybrid, the risk there is, so hybrid meaning that you have some people working in a physical space in the office and some people working remotely from home or from a co-working space or wherever. If you have a ritual that works really well in the office, the people who are not in the office may feel excluded from that ritual. Like, it's not designed in a way where they can fully participate or feel like they're also being impacted. So that's where reimagine your rituals and be like, how can we actually go through this ritual, not just communicate we did the ritual, but actually get everybody participating actively in that ritual. How are you going to do it differently? So that's what I mean by reimagining the rituals. And at the end of the day, these rituals actually drive your culture and differentiate your organization from another one, right? Because different companies will have different types of rituals that kind of define how people connect and how they treat each other and how they generally behave at the company.
In talking about ritual, which is like a building force, or like what do you call it, a solid block to keep the company culture going and moving. Where have you found maybe these challenges of maybe employees not being able to adapt to how company cultures are, maybe coming from a different organization or coming from a different, maybe coming from the traditional way of working and then switching to getting into the remote work or maybe hybrid process? How did that impact them?
Yes, so for example, you're talking about how is it when somebody comes from a different organization? I think one thing I've experienced personally, but I've also witnessed is, for example, you may work at a small company that is very big on transparency, right? Like sharing everything they're doing because they're small. Maybe there's 8-10 people. It's easy to always, if the leader maybe takes that decision, sharing everything that's happening in the company, how much money is in the bank, sharing what the clients have said, like sharing really everything, right? And then you may move to another company, which is way bigger and which has more departments, and people, like each department kind of communicates things in their own way, and there's more silos. So then you have a problem of, oh, well, I'm used to doing everything very transparently, and you come to a new company, and that's not the way that their culture is. It's not as transparent. They haven't set up those kind of ways of working, right? They don't have maybe a way of documenting things or sharing them afterwards. So there can be like a clash sometimes like that when you're, that's just, without even talking about remote work, that's just what happens. And other times I've seen, leaders, managers coming, they have one management style or one way of decision making in their company. And then they move to a company where I was working, and they're trying to impose that way of collaborating, that way of making decisions into the new company. And that's also going to bring up a lot of tension, right? Because people are like, who's this person now? But because they're a leader and they're a manager, you feel like you don't have, depending on the culture of your company, you feel like there may not be a space to bring that up, or there may not be the psychological safety where you can say, well, actually, this is not the way we're working. This is not our culture. So to come back to your question, when it comes to remote work, also there's, transitioning to when you're not used to working remotely and then moving to this way of working where yes, you have the technology, you still need to set up what processes and collaboration and have some agreements on how you're going to communicate and share information. And that's going to, your culture is going to change if you change from, being in the office to being virtual, and making sure that you agree on how that transition is going to happen. And that's where also, change management can come in. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Okay. Yes, it does. It does, because you go into the office every day, you're like, you have, that, okay, maybe by 8 a.m. you have to wake up, and then by 4 or 5 p.m. you're back home, right? And then you find yourself having to work from home. At the office, you probably had some management, you probably had your boss looking after you, you probably had, you could easily stand up from your seat to easily ask a question from anywhere, right? But you know that, hey, you're now working alone, or from wherever you are, and before you get communications down, you might probably get to this person, to the person, or before this person is going to respond to you. So, not everybody actually, not everybody's able to get into that switch ASAP. Some people find it very difficult to switch into understanding that, you have to work from this time to this time and give yourself a break, so you don't overstress yourself, or this is not how we work here in our company. We work from this time. There's a given time whereby people move, like you've mentioned, so that every other person who is coming on board can also follow the same process. But thank you for sharing that insight. And I'm sure those who are listening to this are also benefiting from that. Good to have you on the show, Andre Vinicius. Apologies if I didn't pronounce your name properly, but I'm sure I did. I tried. Okay. Thank you very much, Laila, for that insight. So yeah, I'm talking about our point 2 on, which is very, very much something I really want to also learn and understand about, right? Talking about leveraging asynchronous collaboration to reduce meeting fatigue. What do you mean first by an asynchronous collaboration, before we even talk about the other point?
Right. So in, let's say in this language of new ways of working, especially when it comes to remote work, we talk often about synchronous collaboration or synchronous work and asynchronous. And to define these, we'll start with synchronous. So synchronous really means working in real time at the same time with other colleagues. So that would be, for example, you and I are in this meeting at the same time. I talk, you're talking back to me. That's in real time. We're talking, we're collaborating. That's synchronous. And so asynchronous would kind of be the opposite of that. It would be, for example, we're not collaborating in real time. I'm going to share a message to you either by email or on Slack or some kind of tool. And then you, in your own time, you decide when you're going to get back to me. And so it shows that it's asynchronous, right? It's the opposite of of like us working in real time. So when it comes to leveraging asynchronous work, especially to fight against this meeting fatigue, what's important to realize is that, as you mentioned before, in the office, you could be at your desk and just quickly get up and tap your colleague on the shoulder and say, hey, I have a question for you. And that was like a synchronous way of working, which the office promoted a lot. if you had, your teammates all sitting around you on the same floor. But imagine you had a colleague upstairs on another floor. You would probably pick up the phone and call them or send them an email, and that would have been picking up the phone would have been synchronous, but sending them an email would be asynchronous, right? And so when companies have shifted to remote work, they didn't realize, if they were in the office before, that you can't do that the whole day. You can't tap people on the shoulder the whole day, or you can try and set up a bunch of meetings, right? All the day, hey, are you available for a meeting? Let's have a meeting, schedule meetings. And so what happens is your calendar fills up with meetings back to back, and you have no time to actually get your own work done. And it's not an efficient way of working. Also, if people start working in different time zones. So the advantage of asynchronous is you're going to be able to do more things in your own time. So say, we're taking this outside of a meeting because we don't need a meeting for everything. We're going to agree on what are we going to use as a channel of communication so that we can share whatever documentation or whatever we need to work on. And we will agree that we will leave our calendars free and work more asynchronously. And as a team, if you can do it effectively, it actually saves you a lot of meeting time, and it actually allows sometimes even for people to kind of digest and process information more, rather than being in a meeting where it's just one person presenting and the others are not, contributing, but they need to give make a decision at the end of the meeting, right? So you're also allowing for people to maybe be more included in the collaborative process if you're doing an asynchronous way of working, right?
Okay. So if you don't mind, can you share maybe some example of how this worked for you and how you're able to leverage this whole communication process or collaboration process? Because I must say, working remotely is in itself a different ballgame entirely, right? I know the tech have actually advanced enough to make things in real time, whereby some organizations are able to get these big tools and to make their work process much more simplified. But for those other smaller business or startups that are still trying to balance up their process, how in your own experience, what are some of those examples, or maybe sometimes when you experience such?
Yeah, I'll share maybe two examples. So one is so when I was working at a company where we were more than 1,000 people. Well, we grew quickly. We were around 60, and then we grew up to 1,000 something. Especially when you're so many people and so many people are involved, you can't always bring all these people in meetings at the same time because they might have to do other things, right? So when you are maybe a kind of mid-sized company like that, you may want to consider saying, okay, let's use a collaborative tool, something that everybody can put their input in. So it's not a PDF, right? Because PDF is harder to edit, but it could be, for example, a Google Doc, right? Or it could be an online whiteboard, something where you can share a link and say, hey, this is what we have to do. Here's a task. So maybe it's, before a workshop or a meeting, I'd like to get your inputs on this topic that we're going to talk about. Put everything in here. And so instead of having that in a kind of email, because an email would be, it's not collaborative because it's like a thread and you can't really add comments to people. It's like a very static kind of way of working. You put that in a document where everybody can put their inputs. And then you use the meeting before the meeting, you ask people, please review what everybody's added. Let's make the most of our asynchronous time, so that you come to the meeting already having taken these inputs inside, and you come to the meeting informed. So that's one way of doing it, right? That's one example, which we did in the past and was very helpful. So we call that pre-work, right? So before the meeting, there's pre-work that you do. So you come to the meeting ready, and everybody's like, okay, we've all read the same thing. We're all up to date on what people are thinking about this topic. And now we can talk about the details and focus on things that need to be either changed or reviewed or we disagree on, and then we move on, rather than spending the meeting actually presenting something. So that's one way of doing it. And then maybe only the stakeholders who actually need to make the decision should join the meeting. So maybe get input from 20 people, but there's 5 people who need to make that decision and who actually need to join the meeting. So that's going to be a more effective way, whether you're a small or a mid-sized company, to do that. Another way of thinking of this is, imagine you are
without having to bring in too many people into the conversation that might not really need their inputs at the same time.
Well, also in a meeting, if you have 20 people, not everybody's going to be able to speak, most likely. Let's say it's a 30-minute meeting. But if you do asynchronous collaboration, then you can get 20 inputs. You can also use AI these days to kind of, give me a summary of what 20 people have said. But then the 5 decision makers, they're the ones who can meet and can actually have a discussion with all voices included in the meeting, right? So that's like using asynchronous before and then synchronous after. Another example where asynchronous is very important, if not like a complete necessity, is if you're working in different time zones. So if I'm in Asia, Far East Asia, maybe somewhere, and then I have colleagues in Europe, I'm only going to be able to overlap with them for like 3-4 hours a day, unless I completely change my lifestyle and decide to like stay up to like 5 a.m. or whatever. Right? So to avoid, we want to respect people's lives. We want to respect that they have things to do during their daytime. So you want to really use the time effectively. So when half of the team is asleep and the other half of the team is awake, how can you, that's working asynchronously. The people who are awake, they keep working on their things, giving inputs, bringing forward the projects they're working on. And then when the others are awake, you can hand it over. And then the others continue, right? And so at one company I worked at before, we were a small team, exactly those time zones. We were like London, Central Europe, Malaysia, Indonesia. And so we had a Google Doc for our client projects where it was kind of like an asynchronous stand-up meeting. So the stand-up meetings come from the agile world. And basically you say like, here's what I'm working on. Here's what I've done so far. Here's what I'm doing today. And here are the problems that I'm facing. And so we would, instead of meeting together to share these updates, everybody would put it in a Google Doc. Here's what I'm working. So the different bullet points. Here's what Laïla did yesterday. Here's what she's doing today. And here's the blocker she's facing. And everybody would fill the Google Doc and share it in the same Slack channel so that then the next person could, fill up the Google Doc whenever they woke up. And that was a great way to still be informed of what everybody is doing. So as a manager, you can do that in different ways. There's also these days, there's these bots that you can put in Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever you're using. And you answer these 3 questions, you get the replies, you read them. You've done all of this asynchronously and you're up to date. There's no need to actually come on a meeting. Now, if you see that somebody is blocked and needs help, then that's your opportunity to be like, okay, let me actually talk to this person. Let me set a meeting or let me reach out to them to find out how I can help them. And that's where the synchronous comes in.
Thank you very much. That is very much in depth. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this and who will be streaming this much later is finding insight, because I think we've been able to touch points on the rituals for remote work, talked about asynchronous collaboration or synchronous collaboration, which it's very much effective for global brands, right? Those who are working with teams that connect from different parts of the world, because I can imagine I have a couple of friends who by 3-4 a.m. they're telling me, hey man, I need to stay up so that I could send the reports before I go to bed. And if these structures are not properly put in place, it becomes a problem, right? Because when you get to face the reality, because where you are is the reality, and when you get to face the reality that, hey, this work is getting into your own personal life where you cannot manage it anymore, burnout comes in. And well, we're going to get in depth into the burnout conversation. We're coming to that. But I think what you shared so far is very much strategic and helpful for anyone who even wants to start a 2-man team, 3-man team, 4-man team, 5-man team today. And thank you for that. Looking at our third point on facilitation as a skill, right, that anyone can learn, right? I know so maybe some remote team might say, oh, because I'm a developer or I'm a designer or I am a project manager or I am any member of the team, right? Maybe I don't have to learn this particular skill. I don't need to know this. I don't need to know that. I just need to know what I need to do and then stop at that. But what is your own view from the point you shared here? Why is it important, and what is your own view from your experience?
I have so many views. I love that you brought up engineering and designers as people who are like, I don't need to learn how to facilitate because this is my niche, right? Engineering is what I do. The reality is, as we mentioned earlier, there are meetings. This is part of the remote work. I mean, some companies have a very strong stance on meetings, and they say we don't do any meetings, hardly any. So there are some companies who are heavily asynchronous, and that's part of their culture, and that's fine. But the majority are not. The majority will have some meetings. And the reality is that when you have many meetings, some of them will be terrible, right? Some of them are just like not engaging. The presenter or the host of the meeting like doesn't really know how to be prepared. And so when we have to spend so many times in meetings, we might as well know how to do them well, because that's going to affect our motivation, it's going to affect our productivity, our engagement, and also the way we connect. So the reason I think facilitation is so important, no matter who you are, is that we shouldn't let it be that only the person who scheduled the meeting or who prepared the meeting should host. Everybody should know, because what happens if you and I, for example, you're the one hosting the meeting and you're having connection issues and you can no longer continue, but I know what you're about to share. I should be able to, replace you when you have these connection problems and say, okay, I'm going to continue the presentation, even if I'm a designer, right? I should be able to know as your colleague if I'm aware of what you're going to do. So I think it's an important skill, because everybody's going to benefit from it. You're going to learn a new skill in terms of, it's not public speaking in a way, but in a way, you're learning how to. I
feel like team members, they run away from it.
Some people are very shy.
Mostly developers, or the engineers.
Exactly. But if you are an expert in what you're doing, you want to know how to explain what you're doing to your colleagues, right?
That's right.
So there's no point in sometimes you see these academic people who are incredibly smart in their subject, but then you hear them speak at a conference or on TV, and you're just like, you're talking about climate change, it's so important, but my goodness, it's so boring. Right? And you don't want to be that person. And this is nothing against academics at all. But what I'm saying is, we, as an engineer, as a designer, whoever, marketing, whatever person you are, you want to be able to deliver and explain to people what you're doing in an engaging way. You want to also be able to bring people into the conversation so that you can get their feedback in an engaging way, in a way that is actually going to benefit you at the end of the day. So if you think about facilitation, it is a process by which you are going to guide others to reach some kind of goal at the end of whatever it is, whether it's a workshop, a meeting, a retrospective, whatever it is that you're doing. And it's going to be much more smooth and you're going to get more out of it if you can actually be that guide, right? Whether it's for 2 people or 50 people. And you might want to start small, if it's the first time you're facilitating. But when I was talking before about pre-work in meetings, that's part of facilitation. That's getting your participants ready before the meeting, and getting them excited, or getting them thinking about a topic, getting them in the right mindset before they join. That's also facilitation. So there are so many aspects of facilitation. And then after the meeting, you also want to follow up with people and make sure that if there are action items, people are doing those things. If people weren't able to join the meeting because of their time zone, or they had something else happening, you want to be able to send them that information in a clear way that they can also continue being involved. So at the end of the day, facilitation allows you to make sure that everybody's interested in what's happening and involved and engaged and participating. And that's just going to snowball into like a positive effect, right, for everybody.
Yeah. But in today's what do you call it, in today's business space, we know we have a couple of engineers who are still putting themselves out there to want to lead, to want to manage, right? But how would you say facilitation? I know you've explained this already, but how would you say facilitation helps managers, right? How would you say it helps teams to grow? How would you say it helps them to develop their own skills, or maybe some of those soft skills which they're not aware of?
So for managers, as a manager, you're there to, on the one hand, yes, develop their skills, help them in their roles, but you're also there to communicate a message from above, right? If you're in a hierarchical kind of organization. So there's some company objectives, and you as a manager want to make sure that your team can deliver on whatever their contribution is to that company objective, right? To that vision that you're building together. And so if you as a manager can facilitate, basically what you're doing is being able to make sure that people are talking to each other, people are aware of what's happening within the same team, people can support each other. So right, if it's just you being directive and not allowing people to, not allowing the conversation to be more inclusive, you're not going to be able to actually delegate some of what your work is as a manager. It's like, maybe you don't have to be the problem solver for everything. Maybe there's one person in your team who can help the other person in your team, and you are there to facilitate that exchange, that support
that
between
process.
them. Right.
Yeah.
And then maybe help them discover, maybe sometimes as a manager, you're pushing people slightly out of their comfort zone and be like, hey, I know you haven't done this before. I'm here to help you, but why don't you learn this new thing so you can help the other person or whatever, and you're facilitating that as well. So I think in that scope, as a manager, that facilitation skill is very important. It is a people skill. And then helping other more technical people, to your point about an engineer, I do believe we're all human, first of all. So we all have these, what we call soft skills, or I don't like the word soft skills, but these are like essential skills of like interpersonal relating, right? So yes, an engineer, and I don't like the stereotype either, but might be more like, I'm doing my own thing in my own, world, coding away the whole day. That's fine. But at one point you need to translate whatever you're coding or you're building to people who in your company who maybe don't understand that language. So again, how can your manager help you also build those facilitation skills so that you can then open up your work and also get credit for it sometimes? It's not just about sharing what you're doing and getting feedback, but it's also like, hey, we need to show that a lot of these people who are not on the stage, kind of like, are not on the front. Some employees are always like doing work that is very visible, but then you have people who are more technical or more operational, or who are in finance or accounting. They rarely get to like, depending on the culture, they're not as visible. Their work is not as visible. It's like behind the scenes. So I think there's also a way as a manager to facilitate their, how can you bring them into the scene more and show that, celebrate them more, and how can you help them bring their work forward by themselves?
Okay. While you were saying that, I kind of remembered some of those times when randomly on a meeting, I'm going to be like, hey, I'll call one of the team member. Okay, you anchor the meeting for today. Randomly, and they're like, and you feel that like, hey, he's done it again today. How am I going to catch up with this? But you realize that it helps them, get back on their feet, and that, beyond just coding, beyond managing project, beyond content, beyond this, beyond that, you should be able to have that interpersonal skill to coexist. Because like you've mentioned, in the remote team or remote work, we need that very, very, we need that very, very important, because sometimes if you're not able to share some of those emotions where necessary, share some of those contents where necessary, you might get on someone's feet, which might not be very important and might slow down some process sometimes. But thank you very much for all you shared.
I just wanted to add one more thing. There are baby steps also that you can do. Is like, if you're like the main facilitator, you might have some kind of assistance during the workshop or meeting, and say, hey, you know what, you, Ubang, I'm going to make you the timekeeper. All your own, you don't even have to speak, aside from telling us, hey, time is up. Because maybe you say, okay, we're going to talk about this agenda topic for 5 minutes, and then we're going to move on to this thing for 10 minutes. And so you might be the timekeeper, but I'll be speaking. And then I might ask somebody else to be the note taker. So I find those roles, there's maybe like a speaker, a note taker, and a timekeeper. And that's a way of also like doing facilitation in micro ways and helping people just kind of take some responsibilities and give them ownership of small things. But then you can rotate these roles. So it's like, okay, next time I'll be the timekeeper, you're the speaker, you're the note taker, and then rotate them. And then eventually you also get to see how different people have different ways of facilitating, and get to know people's styles and personalities that way. So it's actually in a kind of, there's an underlayer where you actually get to see people's personalities shine more and get to know them better as well.
Thank you for sharing those steps, and I'm sure those who are listening to us are taking note of that. Juliana is also having an insight from this, and she's saying she's happy to be a part of this. We got a question from LinkedIn. Mario, thank you very much for tuning in. So it's saying, good evening to you, to Mario. He's saying, how do you manage cultural variations within the remote teams in relations to adjusting core functions?
Cultural variations. Wondering what he means by that. Can you read the question again? How do I adjust to cultural
How do you
variations?
manage cultural variations within the remote teams in relations to adjusting core functions?
Yeah, I wish I had a little bit more context
Okay,
to
so
exactly what he
I'm going
means.
to display the
But
question here. So I think you
yeah,
can see the question here. Can you see the question
yeah,
on the
yeah, I see it.
screen?
I see it. I see it.
Oh,
I heard the
perfect.
question. I'm just trying to understand what he means
Okay.
by cultural variations. But what I'm taking is,
Okay.
and I may be wrong, Mario, so excuse me if I'm not interpreting it correctly. But
I believe you
there,
share more insights here.
there
Sure.
are different. Maybe within the same company, there are different microcultures across, in different regions, different parts of the world. You will always have like subcultures in a company. So maybe the engineers have their kind of culture, their ways of doing it, right? Different professional cultures. So I think it's what I
Yeah.
was trying to explain now. Thank you. So
Okay.
you might have, for example, people in, I don't know, sales will have their own culture, and then people in customer support, well, might be part of sales, but you might have different cultures there. And I think the main way that I approach it, and I suggest approaching, is to acknowledge and embrace that there are different cultures at the company, first of all, right?
Okay.
It's not a bad thing. It's actually going to happen whether you like it or not. This is also true for example, you have a multinational remote company, and many people are based, like when I was working at Mural, many people were based in Argentina, and others were based in the US, and others were based across different countries in Europe. We also had some people in Australia, and each region will also have its own culture due to like the geographical culture, right? So there's the professional culture, which Mario mentioned, there's a geographical one, and it's how can you, as a culture leader, as a manager, find ways to celebrate those different cultures? So, for example, or to introduce them to the others. So, for example, the people in Argentina, they had certain words coming from Spanish that they used, or that we like in Argentina, they drink a lot of mate. It's like this drink. It's like a tea that you have to brew. It's quite bitter, and they drink it in a special kind of cup that has a special name, which I forgot. So I apologize for any Argentinian listening. But basically, we turned it into an emoji on Slack, and it's like, and then when new people would come to the company, we would offer them by mail, we would ship to their houses one of those cups and be like, hey, this is because the company started in Argentina. We know that you're in the US or you're in Europe, and but this is part of the culture of the company where it started, right? Or sometimes maybe we would have like, I don't know, some celebrations, like maybe there's Chinese New Year. Okay, not everybody's Chinese. How can you still bring in the traditions of people who are celebrating Chinese New Year to the company? And you can do that with professional cultural things as well. So you can actually say, well, the engineers, they have this kind of ritual. We were talking about rituals before that they do. They, I don't know, meet once a month or once a quarter to do this thing. How can you bring in other departments, other teams to do that ritual with them? Or how can you just share it if you're doing internal communications, you have an employee newsletter, for example, or something like you want to be able to pollinate, right? And to be like, hey, these people are doing this thing, these people are doing this thing, and kind of break the silos, especially if you're remote, because you don't see it. You don't see it unless you're in that channel or in that group. And so it's just about informing. So this is why communication is so important when it comes to remote cultures, like being able to find ways. For example, we had a ritual as well where we would ask a question every Friday in Slack and be like, here's the question. It was like a kind of fun fact question, and everybody could answer, no matter what team, what department, and sometimes these questions were more technical. Like I asked once, Friday fun fact, like how many screens do you have at home when you're working? And the engineers would be like 7, 6 screens, like 8. And and somebody working maybe in another team was like, I have 1 screen, 2. And it's like, what do you mean you only have 1 screen? So it's like
it sparks conversation from there.
Yeah. And it starts with a really silly small thing, but you get to learn. And some people were very proud. Then they start sending pictures. They get up from their desk, they take a shot, their whole like
so
workspace.
You see real time.
And it's like, here's my workspace. And it just, that was a question that got people super engaged. but because it was personal but also work related. And so you could learn about, that team, those people work this way. I had no idea, but that's kind of funny or interesting or whatever. I don't know, Mari, if that answers your question. But
yes, you did. According to him, he said you hit it right to the point.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for sharing that insight. I think the comment session is already heating up with Juliana also sharing her inputs regarding the conversation you spoke about, notes taking and facilitation. Okay. I think one last question coming from Mario said, my last request would regard a comment on governance, risk, and compliance management when remote teams are not aware or guided to adjust to guidelines. I don't know if you can look at that and take on it.
Yes, my last request. Okay. Risk and compliance management. Okay, so I will start out with saying I'm not the compliance expert, right?
Okay.
But what I will say is that in my roles, whether I was head of people operations or head of culture, I often had to work with compliance and understand, like, are we compliant or not in the way that we're working? So yes, you will have, it's important to have guidelines or have policies. I'm thinking more from a people operations or HR perspective, but there will be other kinds of, compliances in effect. It's important to have them. Not all small companies do. At first, when you're small, that's not your priority, but it will become a priority as you grow, as you scale, and especially as some clients will say, we will not work with you unless you have this.
If
and this,
you don't have this. Yeah.
Right. And then you need to get like some audits done and some things done to see if you're technically compliant and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not the compliance expert, but what I will say, it's important to not only create them and find them. And if you don't know where to start from, there are communities out there who can help. So for example, I'm part of a community called Running Remote. They do a yearly conference on remote work. From what I know, it's the biggest one on this topic. So you may want to check it out. And once you join the conference, you can also join their community. I believe that's the way it works. Or there is some kind of paid membership on their website to check out. But it's such a great community to ask people for advice for these kind of things, for example. Or it could be, I don't know, from a legal standpoint, about like insurances or like, can I allow my employees to work from anywhere? Really, if they're going on a holiday somewhere, can they work remotely? Like all that kind of stuff. And so getting advice from others, looking online, all that kind of stuff, and then documenting it, having a place also where it's all in one place, because documentation is extremely important in a remote team so that people can find information, even if the person who owns that information is not online. For example, you want to be able to find it yourself, and then be sure to not just document it, but regularly remind people that it's there, or find ways to take parts of it and inform the company, maybe giving examples, giving a training, for example, something, whatever it is. Sometimes training is compulsory for compliance. So I think that it's to answer his question, like if people are not compliant, then you must also have consequences and know what those consequences are beforehand. Don't wait till like the person breaks the rules kind of, and then create but sometimes that's how you fix things, right? It's like, oh, we never considered that. Okay, now we have to come up with like a follow-up action. But if you do have a compliance team, that's great. Not all teams have that, especially if they're small. And so I do recommend, asking around you, like what have remote teams set up. Actually today on LinkedIn, I just saw somebody is going to publish a book on all the legal aspects of having a remote team in terms of like how this affects, employers basically on many, many different aspects. Her name is Tara. I forgot her last name, but there are more things coming out on that side as well.
Do you have? I believe you should be planning to write a book on remote work so that we can as well learn from most of the insights.
I cannot. I love writing blog posts, but I'm not writing a book. It's too much energy.
All right. Thank you very much for that, and I love the in-depth you've been able to share with us. Before I get to the next question, which we have from the audience or from our comment box here, as at yesterday, I was going through is it a blog from City Group company, right? And as at January, same thing happened with Dell. City talking about having to bring back their people to work 3 times in a week. That is the hybrid process, but whereby it's no more fully remote, but 3 times in a week. And Dell is talking about bringing everybody back to the office. right? How, and these are like two big players. So how do you think this is also going to impact the remote work culture? Or and do you think it's very good approach? Because quickly, a quote from Dell, he made mention of a statement. He said here, what we are finding is that for all the technology in the world, nothing is faster than the speed of human interaction. Michael Dell, nothing is faster than the speed of human interaction. A 30-second conversation can replace an email back and forth that goes on for hours or even days. What's your opinion to that?
My response to that, my initial response is that those companies who are demanding that all employees are must return to the office full time have not been intentional about how they are designing remote work within their companies. So they probably went remote, but they didn't spend enough time or didn't want to, because I mean, I'm assuming Dell would have the resources to do it, right? But like they didn't spend enough time or have a dedicated team to be like, our role is to design the workplace in this new way of working, which is remote work or hybrid work. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate because there are more than enough studies out there repeatedly, especially since post-COVID, that have proved that there is data showing that when done well, remote work will increase productivity, will increase employee engagement and happiness. So if you as an employee, as a person are happy, you're probably going to bring that happiness back into your professional life. That show that you can create, connections online, but also showing that you're also you're making people happier, not just because they can work remotely, but because some, for example, are carers, whether you're a mother or you're caring for, or a father, or you're caring for elderly people, or maybe you live outside of a big city and so you don't want to change your lifestyle, you don't want to commute or move to a big city. So you're helping actually also bring talent and make it more inclusive from everywhere, right? And all types of people. If you're disabled, for example, also, or you may not be able to join to go to a company headquarters as often, whatever, for whatever reason. So I think that the people who are making these statements and decisions are not taking that into consideration. Many times also they may be more concerned about, okay, we have real estate, we're paying rent somewhere, we need to fill up these spaces. Or they are more of a micromanager culture where they think that we can't trust our workforce, so we have to see them physically. We have to see like seats in, butts in the seat, as they say, for us to feel confident that they're getting work done. And what's interesting, what I've also noticed with some of these return to office mandates, so we call them RTO mandates, is that they apply them to everybody, but a lot of times the executive leaders, the C-level, the C-suite may still work remotely. Like they don't necessarily want to come back to the office all the time, but they're asking everybody else to come back to the office. So I think, like anything, you can design things well or you can design things badly, right? And if you didn't design your environment, your work environment to function properly in remote work, that's a shame. But I think also many times it's like this really old school, outdated mindset that comes from the Industrial Revolution, where like we have to see people here working in the factory and oversee them, and it's like, no, we are in a different era now. Like the technology is there. There are so many benefits to remote work, but you have to know how to do it well.
Okay, before I take the last question, what are some of the benefits of remote work, which you've just mentioned, like maybe just a couple of them for our listeners?
So, are we talking about for a company or for individuals?
For both individuals and companies.
Okay, well, we'll start with individuals because that might be the more obvious one, right? So the first one that people bring up obviously is flexibility, freedom of managing your own schedule if you're allowed to do that, if your company is more outcome focused and not time focused. Being able to work independent, like learning how to work more autonomously because that's needed, becoming a better communicator because that is needed to be an effective team player in a remote team. So learning new skills, learning also different kinds of technology and learning new software and things that are out there that you will need as a remote worker. being able to work from wherever you want. So flexibility includes many things, right? I don't know if people can still see me because you are frozen. But I'm hoping people can still hear me. I will move on to just, Ubang, I don't know if you're still there. Moving on to the benefits for companies. One of the things that, I'll come back to the individuals. One of the things that individuals can do is also be able to work from home when you're not able to go to an office for the reasons that I mentioned, whether you are taking care of elderly people or children or somebody else or animals, you may have pets at home that you don't want to leave at home alone. You can also continue, all right. Don't know if this is still live, but I am gone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. But you are frozen.
Sorry, my network, it's a little bit, I think it's about to rain or something. I just got disconnected a little bit. We were done mentioning the benefits, but I'll please, let's continue from where you stopped, please.
Okay, is this being streamed right now? Ubong, I can't hear you. Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, yes, you keep freezing. Yeah, there's a bit of a lag. I was just saying this, are you streaming live to the audience right now, or do you need to stream live again? Because here it doesn't show that we're streaming.
Yes. Actually, live stream right now. It's still recording.
Okay, it's still recording. Hi, everybody. I wasn't sure what was happening. Ubang, you are frozen again, so I don't know. I will continue speaking and hope that you can stitch this together afterwards in the podcast recording. But I was coming to benefits for companies. So there is a lot of research showing that companies who hire remotely will be able to have a bigger access to a wider pool of talent, diversity as well, because if you're just employing people from one region, you're not going to have the same type of diversity as whether you can, hire people from across different regions, different cultures, and diversity is definitely an added benefit to a company. Also having lower overhead costs. I'm just going to keep speaking, even though I don't see Ubang. Lower overhead costs because you don't have to pay for rent or electricity and all the costs that come with that. Being able to also have a higher employee engagement from your team. Again, you have to be intentional about how you design that employee experience in a remote setting. Yes, being able to, innovate more as well. When it comes to remote work, you're always pioneering different new ways of working. So I'm going to welcome Ubang back again.
It's windy and my internet is fluctuating a little bit.
Okay.
But it's good now. It's good now. Apologies for that.
Well, I was sharing some benefits. I did the individual side and the company side, so I don't know.
Perfect. All right, perfect. Thank you. So I just want to come quickly to one of the questions we had here from Juliana here in the comments. Talking about, just give me a minute. Let me just read that out here. Give me a minute. Okay. So the question is, what is your advice for someone new to facilitation, especially in a virtual setting? I don't know if you saw that question.
I did not see that, but thank you, Juliana, for the question.
So that's on Facebook, yes.
It's a very good question. So if you're new to facilitation, I would suggest, first of all, shadowing a facilitator, so you don't have to jump into facilitation without knowing what it is. So I think joining an event virtually where you can observe other people facilitating and learn from them and understand what their experience is, and just take notes for yourself and see like, oh, notice all the little and small things they do, whether it's how they're tracking time, how they're changing the agenda based on maybe the dynamic of the discussion or the people, because it's very much about, understanding where the energy is going, where the focus is going. And you don't have to stick rigorously to your agenda. If you're a good facilitator, you can also change it in between and be like, actually, this is a bigger topic. We should talk about this now. Seeing how also the facilitator is not there to find solutions, but stepping out of it and helping the team or the group find the, solution they want to go to. So shadowing is the first step, I think, watching how other people do it, asking questions after. And then I would start with, there are plenty of resources out there. One good website to look at is Session Lab. They have so much content on facilitation. They may even have some training. I'm not 100% sure about that, but they have definitely a lot of content for facilitation. So, reading that and then saying, okay, what can I facilitate? Something easy, something small. Pick a subject, a topic that you are very comfortable with. Don't start with something you are completely new to. Pick something that you're comfortable with. Maybe it's, related to your role, to a project you're working on, and saying, okay, I'm going to facilitate this with a small group of people. So pick something you're familiar with and do it with a small group of people that you're also familiar with. Ideally, it's, colleagues, team, or if you want to take this outside of work, you may want to facilitate something virtually. Maybe you want to start like a meetup online and talk about something you're passionate about. Or maybe it's, for example, it could be something around a hobby of yours or something like that. Ubang, I just kept talking. Is that okay?
So, all right.
Anyway, I was just telling Juliana, just start with something small, something you're familiar with, and do it with a small group of people that you are comfortable with. And it can be something outside of work. If you want to facilitate, for example, something like a hobby you have, and you want to just share, maybe it's, making cocktails. Maybe you're really good at making cocktails and you want to show people. So you will make a list of ingredients. That's the pre-work. You send it to the people who come online and say, hey, get these things ready, right? And then come kind of like a cooking class, come ready to the meeting. And then you spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes learning how to make a cocktail and facilitating that. That's one way of starting. It doesn't have to be about work. You can pick something more fun, get feedback, and ask your participants at the end to share with you how were you as a facilitator, and then learn from that feedback and then continue improving on what you can do better next time. But I think websites like Session Lab have a lot of great content on facilitation that you can follow and learn from.
Okay, what did you mention again? Session Lab? Or?
Session Lab, yeah. Session Lab is a platform all about facilitation. There are many, I'm part of multiple facilitation communities. One of them is Voltage Control. They offer training for facilitators as well. You can also listen to their podcasts just to kind of get used to like, what does a facilitator do? I do like the Voltage Control podcast. They interview people in different roles in different companies around the world, and you find out how did people get into facilitation. And what I find interesting is most people didn't know that they were facilitating, but they were doing it. Like they didn't know there was a term for what they were doing. If Juliana, if you're interested, look at these two. I would start Session Lab and Voltage Control, see what they're doing, and learn more about facilitation.
All right, sure. Thank you very much for sharing that in depth. Before we wrap up this show, I would like us to just touch point on one thing, which still connects with most of the conversations we've had today, right? Talking about culture, talking about rituals, right? Which is how can one be intentional about distributing culture among teams? You've already mentioned how teams should put down place, but how can managers, right, be intentional about, or leaders or business leaders be intentional about saying, hey, this is why we should move like this as a brand. This is why you also, who is coming into the organization, should also do this so that we can achieve X, Y, Z result.
That is the best question. I love that because you said intentionality, which is something I hope all managers will do more of, to really be, have a purpose when it comes to your culture. It's not just like it's happening backstage and, you are representative of the culture of your company. And when you're remote, think about the only times people see you as a role model is either one, when you're in a meeting and people see you, or when you communicate something in a public channel of communication, whether that's an email, whether that's a instant messaging kind of thing, or a video recording. So coming to answer your question, I would say, you know, open up those conversations with your team about culture. And if you don't know where to start, maybe there's somebody in your company who you can turn to and be like, hey, I want to do a session on culture. I want to facilitate a session on culture within my team, but I don't know where to start. But, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It's like asking, you know, your team, what does it feel like to work at this company? How does it feel like to be working with the team? What are the things that are working well? And what are the things that are not working well in terms of how we work together, how we collaborate, how we communicate, how we treat each other? Also, you know, look at if you have company values, look at those values. Those values are there for a reason. They're not just like words on a document or on a manifesto. They should be used to understand that this is how we want to work together. They should really influence your culture and help you make decisions. So open up that dialogue, I would say, with your team, and also figure out, okay, this is where we're at. Where do we want to go? Do we want to change our team culture within the wider culture of the organization? So to Mario's point before, your team might have its micro culture, and that's fine. But if you want to be more intentional about it, you know, and it doesn't have to be you doing the culture because you're doing it as a team. It's you facilitating the conversation so that then you can understand, do people want to step up and volunteer to do different things, to take your culture where you want to take it, right? Yeah. So taking a step back, to give an example, when I was head of culture at this company at Mural, one thing that I had, because the company at one point I said was scaled from like 60 people to like 1,000 plus really quickly. Yeah. I cannot be everywhere in every conversation, every country, in every time zone. It's not possible. But what I did do was ask who in the company, raise your hand if you want to be like a culture carrier, so kind of like a culture ambassador here, and help me amplify our initiatives to other parts of the company, but also tell me what you guys are doing in different departments. And we meet monthly. So I would meet once a month with all these culture carriers that were in different departments. They were in operations, they were in sales, they were in customer experience, they were in engineering. And they would come and say, hey, at engineering, we started doing a monthly ritual, monthly all hands around this. We also are going to organize an offsite, blah, blah, blah. Somebody in the other would say what they're doing. And we would support each other in our cultural initiatives and be like, oh, you know what? We did something similar. This is how we did it. Here's a template, here's a blueprint. Maybe you can take that and adapt it to your team. Or, you know, another example is like we did a communication charter for the people operations team, which identified how are we going to use all our communication tools and agree that we're going to use them in the same way for consistency, so that it's not like you're using email and I'm using Slack for the same thing. We have to be aligned as a team. So there's many things that you can do as a manager to align your team, but also know that you can delegate. And it actually is very nice it's not just nice, it's like empowering people, right? It's good for you because you can take some of the work off of your workload, but it's actually showing people in your team like, hey, you are really passionate about this one thing. You love creating gatherings and creating ways, you know, or you love doing icebreakers. Okay, you're the icebreaker person. Help us as a team to get to know each other. Share an icebreaker at the beginning of each meeting. Whatever it is, you guys come up with your own rituals. But you just as manager can start, you are the person who can start that conversation, and then you see where it will take you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Laila, for sharing all of this in depth. It's been an interesting 1 hour, despite the glitch we had on last minute. Well, I'm happy we were able to spend at least 15 minutes before the glitch. But nevertheless, I can say for sure that those who are listening and those who will be listening to this conversation much later definitely have found value, or will be finding value, and be able to relate with what you shared, and also be able to draw information and insights from all that you shared today. And trust me, even for myself personally, who is also working remotely or who manages remote team, this conversation has also been helpful for me, having to look back again on what we've been doing on our team process. And probably will have to impute some of them. And some of my team members are also listening to this conversation today. So a big shout out to you too. So a quick one to everyone who's listening to this. We have Managers Magazine Corner out already. And if you're yet to have a copy of that issue, kindly follow up the link in the comment box, either on YouTube, you might find it there, on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever you're joining us from, you'll find the link there, or probably search for Managers Corner Magazine, right? And or you're going to find that on our LinkedIn, and then you can engage with the links attached to it and have yourself a copy of that issue, because we have some very valuable information and insights from the contributors there. And you also find some insightful stories that will also be relatable to you. Just one of the stories, they're talking about a lady who has not eaten for the past 16 years. And I'm like, wow, how crazy is that? That someone has been alive and has not had anything like food, no, and I think the only thing she was able to have was just water. But I'm going to save that story for you to go read it up and then probably tell me how it felt like for you. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for staying tuned with us. Once again, thank you very much, Laïla, for all the insights you've shared with us. And we'll be looking forward to host you some other time, maybe before the end of the year, probably. Let's see how to have more of your insights to talk more about probably facilitation or other discussions. But yeah, we appreciate the time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions. And thank you, Ubang, for having me.
I appreciate it. All right, so everybody, we'll see same time next week, Thursday, on a Now with Manager podcast. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend ahead of you already, and let's get to connect more. And if you want to get more of these conversations, please don't forget to reach out to Laïla on LinkedIn or any of our socials platforms and ask any of the questions, or better still, get to my DM and I'll be able to give you access to connect to Laïla and work your remote team properly as it should be, because the world is moving remote or hybrid. It's all left for you, but let's see how to join the train. And thank you very much for your time, and bye, guys.